and perhaps a few fog patches forming in the southeast first thing Friday. But actually Friday gets off to a fine start across much of England and Wales. Sunny spells for the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast. We keep the sunny spells in the southeast during the afternoon. Brightening skies, meanwhile, for Scotland and Northern Ireland following a damp start to the day. Fresher in the far northwest, but otherwise mid to high teens for many, although it will be increasingly damp for Northern England and North Wales during the afternoon. And then that rain pushes south during Friday night. It weakens and fragments, so mainly just light on and off rain by the early hours of Saturday, and then it clears in time for the weekend. Drier and clearer weather for many. Perhaps a chilly feel first thing for sheltered parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England and Scotland. Temperatures in places down to the mid to low single figures. But bright start for many. There'll be some mist around western and southern coasts, and there'll be some thicker cloud, I think, for central and southern Scotland, as well as parts of northern and eastern England. A few showers here, but for the vast majority, Saturday's looking dry, bright and warm. Low 20s in the south, mid to high teens further north, similar on Sunday.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Tonight on Farage, we discuss Baby P's mother is out on parole despite a government appeal. We ask, how can this be right? 40 years since HMS Sheffield sunk. Have the French told us the full truth about those Exocet missiles? A debate will be had between the taxi trade and an academic report suggesting the knowledge is now old hat and that Uber should be able to use the bus lanes. That should be fun. And Talking Pints will continue the debate about Hunter Biden's laptop and why social media and mainstream media in the USA decided to cancel any news about it. But before all of that, let's get the news.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening. The top story tonight, the Bank of England has raised its key interest rate to 1% from 0.75%. That's the fourth rise in a row and the highest the base rate has been since early 2009. The Monetary Policy Committee is trying to calm down inflation, which it forecasts will peak at over 10% this year. The bank's also warned the economy is set to shrink next year by 0.25%. Matt Dronfield is head of Debt Free London.
Many people think that you go into debt because you've splurged on a credit card or you've overspent on the weekend and not realise it. That's really not the situation whatsoever. Debt doesn't discriminate. We're all facing a cost of living crisis, with the cost of your mortgage maybe going up later today, depending on the Bank of England announcement, your rent going up, your food going up. All these are essential costs that you can't control, and you're left with nothing at the end of the month.
Well, in news away from home, Russia says it's still willing to provide a safe passage for civilians from the steelworks in the besieged Ukrainian port city of Mariupol. Speaking to Israel's Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, the Russian president said Vladimir Putin says Kyiv should order Ukrainian fighters still in the plant to surrender. Ukrainian officials are warning Russia might step up its offensive before the 9th of May, when Moscow will be commemorating the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. President Zelensky, though, is still urging its allies to help rebuild his country.
The rebuilding of Ukraine now should be the same historic example for our time and future as the rebuilding of European countries after the Second World War was in its time. And such investments by the free world, if they are quick, if they are sufficient, will mean that millions of our people who became forced migrants because of this war will be able to return home.
Volodymyr Zelensky. Well, Japan and the United Kingdom have agreed a landmark defence deal as the two countries address ways to pressurise Russia. During a meeting in London today, Boris Johnson and Fumio Kishida have said the pact will allow forces to deploy together to carry out joint exercises and humanitarian relief. Japan also announced a new wave of sanctions against Russia. This is Mr. Kishida's first official visit to the UK, and it was marked with an RAF flypast. The Justice Secretary says the parole board needs a fundamental overhaul after it rejected his bid to keep the mother of baby P in prison. Tracy Connolly was convicted in 2009 for causing or allowing the death of her 17-month-old son. But she could be freed within weeks. Dominic Raab condemned the decision, arguing it was proof the parole system needed to change. The World Health Organization says 15 million people worldwide have died from COVID-19 or as an indirect result of the pandemic. That includes people who couldn't access healthcare for other conditions when services were overwhelmed. The number is 3 times higher than the official tally. The UN body believes many countries initially undercounted the number of deaths. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News, and now it's time for Farage.
Good evening. Back in 2007, the country was deeply shocked by the death of baby P, a young 17-month-old boy, repeatedly abused. Again and again, social workers looked at the case, did not take sufficient action, and in the end, he was dead. There were, of course, court cases, and his mother, who'd allowed this horrific abuse to take place, went to prison. Yet in 2013, the parole board saw fit to let her out. But she breached the terms of that parole and was soon put back in. A few weeks ago, the parole board once again decided that Tracy Connolly was fit to go outside living under parole conditions. This was appealed against by the Justice Secretary Dominic Raab, and in this he was supported by the Labour Party. But the parole board have decided that she is out. She will be out on parole within a few weeks. Now, without going into the absolutely grisly details of the horrific abuse and ultimately death of baby P, I have to ask a question. How can this be right? Is it likely that she may have another baby, that this could all happen again? And we think of case after case, maybe slightly different. Colin Pitchfork, for example, serious sexual abuser of children, let out on parole, and within 2 months was found once again to be attempting to prey on underage victims. I have to say, I think this is wrong. I do agree with both Dominic Raab and the Labour Party. I think the parole board needs a serious looking at. But let me know your thoughts, please. How can this be right? Farage at gbnews.uk. Well, joining me is somebody who knows far more about this subject than I do, and I'm sure many of you at home do. And Paula, you yourself, Paula Hudgell, you yourself adopted a young boy who had been so horrendously abused, he'd finished up having to have his legs amputated. Tell me what you make of the parole board's decision, not just today, but going right back to 2013. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Thanks for having me on. Yes, we know only too well what this is like. We've adopted a little boy that lost both his legs at the hands of his birth parents. Absolutely appalled and shocked that the parole board have allowed her again to walk free, in theory. She was given a chance before and broke her remand conditions. It just shows how important Tony's law that was had royal assent last week, how important that is, because going back to this case... Would you please, Paula, please explain that to the audience. OK, so in Tony's case, both his parents were sentenced to the maximum that they could be because he survived, which was 10 years. Since then, back in 2018, I've campaigned tirelessly with my MP and had the full backing of Dominic Raab recently as well to increase sentences. So, as in the case of baby P, where the maximum for causing or allowing the death of a child was only 14 years, from now it could be life imprisonment. And that shows that actually Tony's law was needed to be brought in way, way before now, because obviously her case, it would have shown then that she could have been sentenced to life.
Yeah, and I'm sure that actually gets wide, broad public support. But when it comes to the parole board, what do you think needs to be done there?
I agree with Dominic Raab. There needs to be a complete overhaul of the parole board. The fact that she broke her licence conditions last time, indicates that she isn't fit to be out.
No, I think that's absolutely right. But I mean, surely the reforms that we need, and this is something I think where both sides of the House of Commons could actually come together and agree. Do we need, is it different people we need, Paula, on the parole board? What is it we need to get a parole system that is actually in touch with where public opinion is?
Yeah, I do think that there needs to be specialist departments. I think on these parole boards, child cruelty is the worst offences that can ever be committed. It's the most vulnerable in society, and the public outcry shows that as well. I mean, how can somebody be so evil, so wicked to harm their own child and cause the death of their child through these circumstances? That actually, it's all well and good sitting on these parole boards, but there needs to be a lot more, especially in the child cruelty cases.
No, I agree with you. And Paula, can I say well done for the campaigns that you've fought. You've stood up very, very bravely in doing this. And I hope, as I say, that both sides of the House of Commons get together and really, really will never eliminate terrible things from happening. But I do think that the punishment really ought to fit the crime.
Can I just say, we are actually pushing for the child cruelty register, which will also help in these cases when they are released, that, they will remain on a register similar to a sex offenders register, because at the moment there isn't one that stands as such.
No, well, there's a lot more work to do. You've made a very good start, and I thank you for coming on and joining me tonight on GB News.
Thank you.
The economy. Thank you very much indeed, Paula. The economy, well, it's clearly very important. The Bank of England put rates up today. They're back up to 1%. And for those of you with very big mortgages, that will be of concern. But I have to say, then this is pretty depressing. The Monetary Policy Committee have put out some economic projections for the next few years. They see inflation getting up to quite near 10% this year, staying next year at pushing 7%, which is the first time we've heard such a pessimistic inflation expectation, though I'm not in the least bit surprised. They think it might start to go down again in 2024. They see unemployment, which is very, very low, but they see it rising over the next 2 years from 3.6% to 4.6%. You may say that's not too much. But when you look at all the other measures here, interest rates, they anticipate going up to 2%, and GDP slowing to almost nothing. This is from the Monetary Policy Committee's own projections published today. So what we have is an acceptance now through the Bank of England and elsewhere that we're going to go on for 2 years with inflation and with very, very low growth indeed. And frankly, it isn't good enough just to sit here and expect you out there paying the bills and paying the taxes just to accept it. And we really do need some fresh initiatives, I think, to help us get the economy of this country back onto its feet. And yes, I think energy is one of the keys to that. Now, yesterday I mentioned the fact that it was 40 years to the day that HMS Sheffield had been hit and sunk. It was a tremendous shock to the nation 40 years ago. And there's been a lot of publicity over the last couple of days about the missiles that were used. Exocet missiles, French manufactured missiles used by the Argentinians. And suggestions on a level I've not heard before that these missiles may well have had a kill switch. And the idea of a kill switch, of course, is supposing your weapons fall into somebody else's hands, you need to have a way of disabling them. And people who were cabinet ministers at the time in 1982, most notably Norman Tebbit and David Mellor, speaking out, accusing the French of not frankly telling us the truth, demanding answers. I just wonder whether 40 years on it's appropriate to have this debate. I also wonder about the truth or otherwise of the so-called kill switch. Well, somebody who wrote a book about all of this with HMS Sheffield on the front cover was spy writer and intelligence expert Nigel West. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
You saw the words of Tebbit, of Mellor, deeply critical, the former second in command of HMS Sheffield on the front pages of some of the newspapers today, Charles Moore at the weekend in the Telegraph, you know, kind of saying, look, we need to know the truth about this. So let's just get the facts right about this.
Well, let me explain about the Exocet AM-39, which is the air-launched variant. So we knew, and the French knew, that they had supplied 5 of these missiles. And in order to deploy an Exocet, it has to be married up to the avionics of the super-étendard aircraft. The French had never done that, and they believed that the Argentines were not capable of marrying up the missile to the aircraft in the first place. Second place, it's the deployment of the super-étendard aircraft. It doesn't have the range to get anywhere near the task force, so it was going to have to be refueled mid-air and the Argentines only had 2 KC-135 refueling tankers. So the chances of this attack taking place were extremely limited. And let me just explain how...
But it still happened.
It happened, but let me explain how Exocet works. Exocet is flown to about 40 miles of the target by the super-étendard aircraft, assuming that the avionics problem had been solved, which the Argentines did solve, which we didn't know and the French didn't know. The Exocet is then brought up to a height to be able to see the target, and then the bomb is dropped itself, the Exocet is dropped, and it flies at an altitude of about 15 feet, sea skimming. It then comes up very briefly in order to have a second look at the target. Now, it's been locked onto the target by the super-étendard aircraft. The first time that it pops up, it sends a radar signal in order to be able to identify the target, and then drops down again to its 15 feet altitude. The countermeasure for this is two things. One is electronic countermeasures, which means that when the Exocet pops up to have a look at its target, it is confused either electronically or by chaff. That's the aluminium foil that is deployed.
But we hadn't expected this to happen, had we?
We had not expected any of this to happen. No. And the important thing is that the French did supply all the avionic frequencies to the British at the request of Mrs. Thatcher, who asked François Mitterrand to supply the information. His brother was chairman of Aerospatiale. So he supplied all the frequencies, which meant that our electronic countermeasures should have been able to deal with this if the threat had existed. It wasn't appreciated, but worst of all, I'm afraid the blame lies with HMS Sheffield, because they had all their kit switched off at the time, and the Exocet went straight past two other vessels that were part of the Royal Naval screen that evaded the Exocet, and the Exocet then went and hit Sheffield, which was a sitting target, completely unprepared for the attack.
And what about this concept of a kill switch?
So
because that seems to be, and we're 40 years on, and I'm surprised we've not had as fierce a debate around this since the time of the Falklands War. What about the kill switch?
There were a lot of rumours at the time about the French not cooperating, about French engineers being in Argentina. There was no kill switch, and if you think about it, the idea that we could be supplied with some kind of equipment that would neutralise a weapon that had already been fired toward its target is just so improbable.
So is this unnecessary French bashing? Did the French actually do the right thing in the end?
The French helped us enormously. There were only 5 Exocet AM-39 air-launched variants. The other Exocets that we dealt with were engineered by the Argentines themselves, and so that they were surface launched, but they were put on the back of a truck and fired once they'd actually got to East Falkland. I mean, this was an extraordinary series of events, highly improbable that the Exocets could ever have been fired by the Argentines, but they achieved that.
But they were. Very interesting.
And just to tell you something really important, no Exocet missile has ever detonated on its target. The Sheffield sank, but it sank because the Exocet, the kinetic energy of the missile hitting the vessel, plus the fuel in the Exocet, was what created the damage, and it took 8 days for the Sheffield to sink.
Yeah.
The truth is that Exocet is an unreliable weapon and has never, the warhead has never detonated in the combat scenario.
Well, you see, there you are, folks. There's Nigel West telling you, don't believe all you read in the newspapers. In a moment, we're going to have a debate, yes we are, between the black taxi drivers of London and an academic think tank who believe the knowledge is old hat, unnecessary, we can do it all on GPS these days, and that Uber should be able to use the bus and taxi lanes. I think we're on for a very spirited debate in just a moment.
Millions of people across the UK are heading to the polls in a vital test of Boris Johnson's premiership. This isn't just about Westminster, these are local elections. A chance for you to decide how your community is run. We'll be talking to senior politicians, election analysts, our team of reporters around the country, and of course, to our team here in the studio. And we'll have comprehensive coverage of the elections to the Northern Irish Assembly. That's the UK Votes 2022. From 10 a.m. on Friday morning, here on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually. That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Coming up on The Mark Steyn Show, Charlotte Wright joins to share her struggles with the vaccine compensation scheme after losing her husband last year. Laura Perrins will be on hand to address the media groupthink on COVID lockdowns. Plus, we are joined by singer-songwriter and guitarist the great Ted Nugent as he releases his latest album. All that and more on The Mark Steyn Show from 8 o'clock.
Your thoughts on the parole board overruling the government's objection and the mother of baby P being released in a few weeks' time. Nelia says to me, it makes me wonder who sits on these secretive parole boards. Are they all a bunch of wokies? I don't know the answer to that. Be good if we did, I guess. Mike says, our justice system is like everything else, faulty, broken and illogical. We urgently need a new Thatcher to kick everything up in the air and remake it. The mother of baby P should do her full term in prison. Yes, but arguably it's too short a term anyway, and that was the debate we were having a few moments ago. Barbara says she should never see light of day. Edwina says it should be a term of parole if it is allowed, if she's sterilised. Well, Edwina, that's a strong opinion. I do suspect it would actually have some support. And on Twitter I get, these are children. Every parent must be in disgust at this parole board that they could even recommend such a decision. But I suspect we all know where the public is on this. Now, the Black London taxi, an iconic symbol of London. Indeed, when you come into Heathrow Airport from other parts of the world, amongst the symbols of our great country, you see Black London cabs. So it's an image that means something. And our taxi drivers have to do something called the knowledge, which is laborious, incredibly hard work. They have to know virtually every nook and cranny of London. It takes them, I think, about 4 years of real hard work to get to that standard. And that's why, we have had, I think, over the years, by far the best taxi drivers of any city in the world, albeit they're quite opinionated if you've got a well-known face. But other than that, I've always thought they were great. But of course, the world changes, the world moves on. We all know that and understand that. We've always had, or for many, many years, licensed minicabs, but it's the advent of Uber, I think, that has thrown the whole thing up into the air. Now, a report has been issued by the Free Market Adam Smith Institute. It suggests that the knowledge is now outdated. We've got ways, we've got all sorts of, means of using sat-navs to get around the capital. And their other suggestion is that Uber and firms like this should be able to use the bus and taxi lanes. And the author of the report, Maxwell Marlowe, joins me. I'm also joined by Steve McNamara, General Secretary of the Licensed Taxi Drivers Association. Gentlemen, good evening. So, Maxwell, let's just think about this. So let me just recall with you an Uber experience I had. So I was in central London, wanted to get back to the outer London-Kent borders, An Uber was ordered for me. I got in the back. The guy did not speak any English. I mean, no English. He clearly had my postcode, a rural postcode, and sat-nav in rural areas is notoriously useless. And he started taking me in completely the wrong direction. And we're going along the Thames, heading out through the Blackwall Tunnel. And there's a massive loop round from a journey. And I was sort of raising my voice and, you know, kind of knocking on. But I couldn't make any connection with him at all. I did think about jumping out at the lights. I've also had Uber experiences that have been very, very good. But when it comes to actual knowledge of getting around London, Uber can't compete with a black cab driver, can it?
Well, you should really speak to a representative of Uber to take up your complaint. And I did try to come to the studio with a black cab, but none was available. So there are different ways of looking at this.
But there's an app, isn't there? You know where you can get. I mean, you can use an app.
Would be the app for.
But you can use an app for black cabs as well as you can use an app.
Yes, of course.
Yeah,
and those do exist.
Yeah.
But tried ringing them up, nowhere to be seen. It's not the only issue, but we do have a real fall in the number of black cabs in London. I think the TfL put the numbers at a fall of 11% over the past 10 years, whereas the number of private hire vehicles have gone up 40% in the past 10 years.
So you're arguing there is a demand-supply issue, and fine, we can talk about that, but my point to you was that when you get into a black London cab, you know, he or she generally know where to go because they put the hard yards in. Can a sat-nav compete with that?
I think it can. I think we've seen a really, well, you made the point about the rural areas, we've seen a really good rollout of 4G and 5G across rural areas, which has helped basically supply this. We have great apps like Waze, which is a community-led app which basically puts together thousands of pieces of knowledge about slow roads, construction sites, red traffic lights, green traffic lights, all across London simultaneously. The knowledge just can't compete with that. No matter how much money you spend and how long you spend.
Steve, I mean, there is a point here, you know, that Waze actually is pretty good.
Look, Nigel, the reality is these sat-navs are quite good, but the bottom line is if you leave here this evening and you're driving yourself, you don't turn it on because you know where you're going. And that's why we don't need a sat-nav, because we know where we're going. And sat-navs are a poor substitute for the knowledge. But I think the wider issue here is, I mean, Maxwell tells you that you need to take it up with Uber. Of course, one of the questions is who sponsors the Adam Smith Institute? And I think we all know the answer to that is Uber funded this report, and it's an Uber published document. And it's very interesting that some of the terminology...
That doesn't necessarily make it wrong.
No, it doesn't, but people tend to fund things, they want to say what they want to say, don't they?
Yeah, I get that.
And of course, some of the terminology he uses in there, he's telling us about the benefits of dynamic pricing. Well, dynamic pricing is what the general public know as surge pricing. And so what happens when it gets a bit busy, they charge you more. I mean, the prime example was the London Bridge attacks. My members are going there to take people home for nothing, and Uber is surge pricing them and charging them 10 times normal fare. That is what happens. So we either put all our eggs in a $70 billion American company that's never made a penny and keeps losing money, by the way, or we recognise that licensing in the UK, because part of Maxwell's report is that we should virtually scrap all licensing rules and regulations, and it should be a free-for-all.
But he says he couldn't get a black cab to come.
Well, I managed to get one quite easily. I walked out of my office in Southwark. No, well, I walked out of my office in Southwark and put my hand up. Look, if I want to go to the theatre on Saturday night to see the latest, whatever the trendiest West End show is, I'm not going to see it. But that's not an argument for having a theatre on every street corner so that we can all go on a Saturday evening. The bottom line is there are issues with supply and demand on any service.
But your argument really here is you know where you're going, that makes you a better and safer driver than somebody following a sat-nav.
Absolutely. And of course the key issue is we have got the best safety record in the world. 38% of London's taxi fleet is now electric. We've got members investing £3.5 million a week in buying 50 electric cabs to provide the only wheelchair accessible, the only fully disabled access vehicles anywhere in the world. London has not just got the best cab service in the world, it's got the safest and the greenest. And why would we want to change that?
Now, when it comes, and I think the most controversial part of your report is this. You're suggesting that Uber or other firms like Uber should be able to use the bus and taxi lanes in London. I mean, presumably, if that happened, it would clog those lanes up to the point where it might be quite difficult for the buses to move around.
Certainly a valid point, but at that point I kind of say, well, why should the taxis have priority over the Ubers? And if I can very quickly say...
let me just answer that very quickly, because they give a superior service, and that's what you're paying
if
for.
If that were the case, Nigel, they wouldn't be, falling in demand. Whereas as we had a great piece of reporting a few months ago from the New York Times saying 20,000 more drivers are needed for Uber to keep up with that surging demand they have. The public vote with their purse, and the purse is saying
there are
Uber.
not enough black cabs to satisfy the demand. What's happening, Steve? Are you all retiring?
No, we're not all retiring, Nigel. I mean, obviously, you're taking figures pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. My members had, and indeed the private hire industry had the worst pandemic ever, and no one was moving. Firstly, let me tell you why we can use bus lanes is because we're hailable from the street, so you need to be able to pull into the bus lane. And
his report suggests that actually Uber and others should.
And his report also suggests that we should do away with wheelchair accessibility and stuff like that. Well, you're suggesting that we use our cabs to take tourist rides. The reality is that the reason we can use bus lanes is because we're easily identifiable, we can be held by the street, and we know where we're going. The private hire industry use a plethora of vehicles. You say it's the most dangerous aspect. The most dangerous aspect of Maxwell's suggestion is that anybody from anywhere in the world with any form of driving licence, not just a UK or a Northern Ireland licence, but any form of driving licence from anywhere in the world, many places you buy a driving licence, could turn up in the UK, drive on the wrong side of the road to them and take people for hire and reward. I mean, frankly, it's laughable.
It's a fair point.
I don't think it is.
No,
I really
go on.
don't. How many cases do we have, apart from that one American security officer who drove on the wrong side of the road happening in the UK? It's really not that much. And I must say, you are misrepresenting the report massively. You said we want to get rid of all licensing and regulations. We do not. I argue very clearly we need a robust, transparent,
Maxwell, what you're arguing is the service offered by Uber is equal to that offered by London black taxis. You're arguing these things are equal and therefore should both have the same rights and privileges.
I really think the public should make their mind up on that, and that's what they're doing. The thing is that black cab.
The fact. The bottom line is that we've never been busier than we are at the moment. The taxi industry in London is having a massive boom.
Absolutely.
And of course, what you say is when Maxwell's arguing it, he's been paid to argue it, and that's the bottom line.
Is that true, Maxwell? Answer the charge.
Well, I mean,
are you being paid
to argue your point?
There's no doubt that Steve is acting in his self-interest, and we fully understand that.
And I put my hands up to that.
His job is to represent other black taxi drivers.
Absolutely.
And clearly you're representing an economic interest of the Adam Smith Institute. But I tell you what, chaps, it's a fascinating debate. It's not going to go away. The next time you come back, we'll talk about Sadiq Khan and his role in all of this.
Happy to do so.
This one will run and run. Gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed. Now, we are having a situation where for the last 2 years, exams, schooling, everything has changed in just the most extraordinary way. It's been very, very difficult for teenagers, but there are many that think that actually doing exams is somehow outdated, is somehow wrong. And Ofqual, the regulator for education, they are suggesting that technology, in many ways, can change all of this. That actually, rather than sitting in a drafty examination hall and being asked, you remember this, don't you, to turn over the paper and then to write longhand your answer to the questions, be that at GCSE or A-level or whatever else it may be. The suggestion is that actually this could all be done online at home. There's also a concept called adaptive testing, which means depending how you answer the first few questions as to whether the exam gets harder or gets easier. Now, I do struggle to get my head around some of this, but Steve Chalk, who is founder of the Oasis Academy Trust, you've got 53 academy schools, so you've got your hands full in many, many ways. Just that first point, that when you go into that drafty examination hall, a gymnasium that's been used for the purpose or whatever, you are expected to write, aren't you?
Yes.
In longhand. If we turn exams to being done on computers, the skill of writing will be lost completely.
Not necessarily. So I was listening to you just now, Nigel, we're talking about taxes.
Yeah.
And you said the world's changing.
Yeah.
You use a sat-nav. You were complaining that your sat-nav doesn't work as well as it should do down by your village.
Yeah.
People used to say, you've got to use maps. Now, there's a certain skill in map reading that's lost when you've got a sat-nav.
Which actually leaves us poorer for the experience.
I've just been sitting in your green room. I counted the number of computer screens and laptops. There's loads of them in there.
What I'm saying is that the actual basic human skill of being able to write is still quite important, despite the fact we do less of it.
The skill of being able to write is important. Now, in actual fact, if you read what Ofqual have said, Ofqual are the board that kind of pushes ahead in terms of exams, they say over the next 3 years, what we should do is think about the use of digital technology in terms of exams. So it's not about abandoning everything and move it from over here to over there, but it's about incorporating these things. In the pandemic, there's an interesting thing. In the pandemic, because we do have so many schools, we've got 32,000 students, the pandemic taught us that home education is important, but some kids are advantaged and some kids are disadvantaged. So what we did...
And that depends on their home circumstances as much as anything else.
Exactly. So what we did is we bought 35,000 iPads. In fact, Apple said to us it was the biggest purchase of iPads ever. But what it means is that every child can learn at home in exactly the same way. But what we discovered was this. They begin learning different things. They begin experimenting, exploring. You could argue that exams in that drafty old hall are just a memory test. You come in and it's short-term memory, and the better you are at writing in short-term memory, the better you do. What if you could bring a digital device in and use it to explore and to analyse? One of the things that employers around here say, as I'm sure you'll know, is that we produce people from schools who aren't able to think. They're not as creative as they should be. They're not as business ready as they should be.
It's very difficult to measure those things, isn't it? Which is why I'm so fascinated by this new concept of adaptive testing. Explain all, please.
Adaptive testing simply, well, here's something you should know to start. Perhaps you do. A third of kids every year, for years and years, since you were young and since I was young, have left school feeling that they're absolute failures. And that's a real problem that we have as a nation. They call it the forgotten third. The kids who are only taught by school, I'm thick. But adaptive learning, which you can use digitally, if you answer a question right, and putting it very simply, it asks you a harder question and a harder question, but if you miss one, it drops down a level. So it's actually more accurately testing your ability and your knowledge than a paper that you sit in front of and you can't do anything about.
But how does an employer look at this? How does an employer measure this? It's all very complicated, isn't it?
It's not very complicated. Well,
Sounds it.
Yeah, but you're not a digital native, are you, Nigel?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. And I get that. I get that. I do get that. But the idea, I mean, look, let's just sort of recap on education. You know, handwriting as a skill is still necessary.
Absolutely.
Fine, good. Otherwise, you know, this approach of doing everything on computer.
But it's not all or nothing, is it?
Well, I hope not. That's why. That's one of the reasons I've got you here to talk about.
So I came in, I sat in your green room with my iPad, and someone said, "Oh, you brought an iPad. Is that to prove a point?" It's not. It's because I work on an iPad. But I also picked up a pen and did some scribbling.
And classroom skills. And classroom learning matters.
Classroom learning matters, but our idea of learning, you'll find that probably even the headmaster, I think you went to Dulwich College.
I did.
You'll probably find that even the headmaster of Dulwich College, I might be taking his name in vain, but I certainly know the headmaster of Harrow and Eton and Lord Baker, who introduced GCSEs, all say together, a view that I totally agree with, that the problem with GCSEs and A-levels is they're too narrow, they're too rigid. What we need is a wider way of testing a young person's intelligence.
And a final thought on all of this. The forgotten third, they might be really good at trades and skills. They shouldn't be leaving school feeling like failures. They should be leaving school having been directed towards things they might be good at. And we're not doing that.
No, exactly. So we've got to measure what's in your head, how you use your hands, and what's in your heart. You can leave school now in our society being very good at short-term memory. You can remember the classics, etc., etc. You can do very well. But who's testing your character, your integrity, your ability to tell the truth?
And they're subjective things that are tough to measure.
And introducing digital technology into learning broadens things out. So you talked about kids that are going to leave school and work with their hands and be engineers, etc.
And earn lots of money.
And they need digital skills to do it, Nigel.
No, they need some. Of course they do.
When you get a guy to refit your kitchen, you hope he brings his iPad.
But they don't need 9 GCSEs, is the point I'm making. Steve, it's a really interesting debate, and I want you to come back, and we're going to keep watching this, and it matters hugely. I'm also very keen to find out at some point from you in the next couple of months just how much damage has been done to kids over a couple of years
I'd love to talk about that. I think it's an important issue.
Thank you. Well, sticking for a moment on the education theme, a report, an analysis of London-based journalists shows that 80% of them come from what we can only describe as privileged backgrounds. Now, all we ever hear about is diversity, but we don't hear anything in journalism about diversity of class. And I think that's a really important thing. And social mobility is one of the themes we want to pursue on this show. I can assure you that at GB News, it is most certainly not 80% that have come from privileged backgrounds. Now, last night I was talking to Emma Jo Morris about the Hunter Biden laptop, her role. She's at Breitbart now, but she was there at the New York Post. They effectively got censored from putting this stuff out. And for the first time ever on my show, and it's rarely happened here at GB News, it has happened. It's happened to Channel 4 recently too. We lost transmission for a few minutes. This was not a conspiracy theory. We're going to continue part 2 of the Hunter Biden laptop in just a minute.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good evening. It is Talking Pints, yes, and we've managed to refine the pint glasses, having nicked the last lot. Now, last night we were in full flow about this extraordinary story about the Hunter Biden laptop, but even more extraordinary than what it revealed is what the reaction to it was afterwards. So, there was no conspiracy. It was not the deep state. I absolutely promise you. Emma Jo Morris was in full flight and we lost transmission for the last part of the interview. But I am hoping that she's rejoining me in New York this evening. Emma Jo, are you there?
Yes, thank you. We'll have to recapture the magic.
Well, it was going so well. So let's go to where we kind of stopped, or part of the transmission stopped. So the Hunter Biden laptop is in your position. You at the New York Times are running big, full front pages on it. Just remind us in 2 or 3 minutes of what that laptop said about Hunter Biden's business interests in Moscow, Beijing, Kiev, and what the relationship between those business people was with his father when he was the vice president.
Yeah, so I'm so sorry to correct you, but I was at the New York Post. Out here in right-wing media.
Sorry, I apologize. I apologize.
So I got the laptop. I think we got cut around the time that I was saying it was about 4 weeks to the election. And I was talking with my then editor-in-chief about what we would cover. At the time, I was the deputy politics editor. So I was directly reporting to the editor-in-chief, and she was working with me on this. And she says, I know he's a consultant, and I even know that he's a sketchy consultant, and I know that he kind of grifts off of his family name. I know he has a drug problem. What can we find on there? Find me something on there that's brand new, and that will really be something that is worthy of this drop and worthy of this scoop. So I knew that Joe Biden had mentioned, obviously, this was televised and very public. He was bragging about how he had a Ukrainian official fired for investigating Burisma, which was the company that his son was on the board of at the time. And so I figured maybe I'll find something, more interesting to build on that story that we all already know and that, my audience would be familiar with. So I started to look through the contacts and the emails from those contacts of the people associated with Burisma. And I found, which became the first story, I found an email that said, "Thank you for the meeting with your father." So I knew then, okay, Joe Biden is now involved in this. And I didn't know the extent that he was involved, but I knew that at least Hunter was introducing him to his business partners, which was previously unknown and vehemently denied by Biden and his campaign. He would always say that he has no idea what his son's up to, and that's his business. And that was kind of the plausible deniability that he was using. So that was our first story. That was the front cover that your producers just threw up on screen. And we had a side, like a sidebar on that story that the White House had been leaking conference calls to Burisma as well via Hunter and a proxy that he had hired. So that was the first story. That story was instantly banned on Twitter. The links were disabled instantly. Accounts were getting banned for sharing the report. The New York Post was locked out of its account. And this is not like, a rinky-dink paper in America. You have to understand, this is the oldest paper in America. It was founded by Alexander Hamilton, one of the founding fathers of the country. It is the fourth largest paper in circulation in America. This is unprecedented. It's impossible to overstate how scandalous that was. And
the rest of that was the action taken. That was the action taken by the big social media giants. But what about the reaction of, I mentioned them earlier, the New York Times? What about the reaction of the other press, print and mainstream media, not just the social media giants? What did they do?
Yeah, so I mean, this is part of the reason why I have to distinguish myself from the New York Times, who I find just an unserious publication. They had a great reputation in their day, and now they're kind of lazy and a bit neurotic. The first thing that the New York Times did, specifically, they had their media reporter try to discredit me personally. I had come from working at Fox News, which is another Murdoch-owned corporation, obviously, in the United States. I was formerly a producer there before I was at the New York Post. They tried to say that I was a right-wing operative or something. That was obviously what they were implying. Other publications tried to say that the story was Russian disinformation. Politico, which is, a huge publication in the U.S. and, hugely influential in Washington, said that there were 50 former intelligence officials who think that the Hunter Biden story is Russian disinformation. And then there's a caveat in like paragraph 10 that says, they haven't seen it, but they think so. Buried lead. They were obviously.
And was all of this, Emma J, was all of this because the social media giants, the mainstream media companies had become so utterly partisan in wanting Biden to win and Trump to lose? Is that what this was all about?
It would appear. And I don't think it's necessarily a and you understand this very well, I don't think that this is a binary left-right thing. I think that this is an establishment versus anti-establishment thing. Biden, it's not about Biden, and it's not about him being a Democrat or necessarily even his specific policy positions or opinions. It's about the fact that he represents and he protects the interests of a group of kind of like a gilded class. And they find the opposition, i.e. Trump and his voters, just beyond, like, they cannot have power. They cannot have power. They're too stupid, too poor, too unsophisticated, and Joe Biden
too deplorable. Too deplorable, led by a disruptor. No, I get it, and we saw many similar parallels during Brexit. But let's try and finish, if we can, with a note of optimism. Is Elon Musk the great white knight hero who is going to restore free speech and open debate in America and across the free world by taking over Twitter and being an example to many others?
Yeah, I hope, and this, I said it again on your show yesterday before we got cut off. He seems to say that. And it seems like actually this Hunter Biden saga was one of the catalysts that made him say this needs to be taken over and reformed. And it seems that that's what he wants, and that's what he says he wants. And I have no reason to not believe him. The thing that I'm concerned about is, as you know very well, and as I experienced myself, it's the second you try to go up against the establishment, or whatever you want to call them, the power center that is, they don't just toss you the keys. And I think that he's going to have a lot of pushback, and he's going to have to deal with a lot of griping, let's say, before he can really accomplish the agenda that he's setting out to do.
I agree with that, but if anyone can do it, it is the unconventional, the biggest disruptor in many ways in business and the richest man in the world. If anyone can do it, he can do it. I want to say, Emma Jo Morris, thank you very much for your story. Keep doing what you do at Breitbart News, and thank you for sharing that with the British audience. Thank you very much indeed.
Right.
Well, what an amazing story. It is a truly extraordinary story, a shocking story about the extent to which so-called media, or most of it, became just so political back in 2020. Barrage to Farage, here goes. Mickey says, do you think Biden should be removed from office for his incompetence and his corruption? Well, can't prove his corruption, Mickey, but I can prove, certainly with the evidence that Emma Jo, the New York Post put out, and others, that he absolutely lied to the American public about his son's business partners ever meeting him, and it's clear they did many, many times. He should be removed from office under the 25th Amendment. 25th Amendment, which says those around the president can deem he is not fit to continue with his job. Whenever Trump said something that was considered outrageous, they screamed and shouted the 25th should be moved, and no one does when it comes to Sleepy Joe. I'm asked by Sean, do you think that MP porn, Partygate, Pintgate, etc. just show the failure of ethics throughout society in general? To some extent, you're right. I think perhaps as a society we have lowered our standards considerably, but I think the truth of it is we don't have the right people in politics. I'd love to see our system opening up, having open primaries, getting different people, we'd get higher quality. I really, truly believe so. Now, Farage at Large goes out round the country. Last Thursday, we were down in Rochester, in Medway. We had a full house, a great show. Many enjoyed coming along. If you want to join me for a Farage at Large, I'm going to be in Hull next Thursday. Going to be in Hull next Thursday, live, Farage at Large. Come and see how a TV programme is made. Come and ask me questions directly. Come and take part in the whole thing. GBnews.uk if you want to come to Hull next Thursday. In a moment, it's going to be Mark Stein, who will be as entertaining as ever. I'll be back with you on Monday. Let's have a look at what the weather is going to do for us.
Hi there. Increasingly cloudy in the north with outbreaks of rains pushing south, but drier further south during the next 24 hours and warm in the southeast on Friday ahead of the rain. The weather fronts that are bringing the rain have brought some damp weather to the far northwest of Scotland during Thursday and a lot of cloud for Northern Ireland and Scotland. But overnight, we'll see even wetter weather arrive for western Scotland. That arrives by midnight, and then eventually that reaches much of the rest of Scotland as well as Northern Ireland during the early hours of Friday.